Welcome back to episode 6 of the Jungle Fever podcast. I'm Ethan Sargent. Aiden Crowley is alongside me as always. And again, another busy week in the Bengals fandom. Even though it is the offseason, feels like this team's just always dominating the headlines no matter what. We
For
got a
better or
lot to
for
talk
worse.
about today. Sorry, say that again. I
No, I
missed
was going
that.
to say for better or for worse right now.
Yeah,
So,
no, 100%. You're exactly right. We have a schedule. We have a full 17 games. We're going to go through every game. We're going to talk about what we nailed. We're going to talk about some things I dislike, Baltimore. We're going to talk about some of the little nuances to the schedule, some of the perks, some of the not so good things. We'll discuss all of that and more. And then, of course, the ever ongoing saga continues. Trey Hendrickson, the day after we recorded, actually, we had gotten the news live on the podcast about him going to Adam Schefter. The next day, Trey Hendrickson shows up to Bengals off-season activities. He had a nice long sit down with reporters while practice is going on. We're going to talk about it. We're going to break it all down. We're going to do that a little bit later on. We'll talk about some positive stuff first, and we'll get to the 2025 schedule for the Cincinnati Bengals. I think the first thing to do here is to just lay the schedule on you all in case you missed it. It's been a couple weeks, or it's been about a week now, but here it is. If you missed it, the Bengals will start their season in Cleveland. They'll be taking on the Browns on Sunday, September 7th. That is their first game of the season. Then we move to two straight. They play 1 p.m. the first 3 weeks of the season. They then host their home opener is against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Trevor Lawrence, Travis Hunter coming to town in week number 2. Then they will travel to Minnesota, a little Viking Bengals LSU reunion with Justin Jefferson. That'll be 1 o'clock on CBS. Then their first primetime slot of the season is in week number 4. And this starts what I think is one of their tougher stretches of the season in Denver in what could be a very important game late in the season. They will be that'll be a Monday night game. That'll be Monday, September 29th on ESPN, or actually be on ABC. It'll be one of the split primetime games, kind of like the one last year against the Commanders. Short week on to Sunday where they take on the Detroit Lions. It doesn't get any easier as the Lions come to Paycor Stadium, and then they will head to Lambeau Field in week number 6 and take on the Green Bay Packers. Week number 7, they're back at home and they're back in prime time, and they'll take on the Pittsburgh Steelers. That'll start actually a run of 3 straight weeks where the Bengals will be, actually 4 straight weeks, where the Bengals will be in prime media slots. Monday Night Football, America's Game of the Week on Fox for the Lions game. CBS's America's Game of the Week slot, Jim Nantz, Tony Romo for the Packers game on CBS. And then it'll be the Steelers. That'll be Thursday night. So that's a prime game, and they'll be at home against the Steelers. That'll be week number 7. Then they get the Jets at home. They actually get 3 straight home games before the bye this year, which I really like. They get the Jets at home in week number 8, and then in week number 9, they will get the Chicago Bears, and that comes to their bye in week number 10. Let's pause there for a second before we get to the back half of the schedule, and just let's react to a little bit of some of the things we see there. Obviously, again, the national eye, the national media's got a lot of looks at the Bengals, and you get this idea when you have a guy like Joe Burrow, when you have receivers like Jamar Chase Higgins. We talked about this last week on the show. You're going to get those kind of primetime looks.
yeah, absolutely. And the main takeaway for me, and this is true just in general of the schedule, is if there is ever a year you need to start fast, and we have said this for the past, what, 3 years with this team, you need to start fast. Yeah, it's now because going to Cleveland and then at home against Jacksonville, I know Cleveland has typically had our number, and that's just a team we don't match up well against. But at the same time, that's a game that you are expected to win. Same with Jacksonville. I mean, maybe Jacksonville has improved with Travis Hunter and their new coach, and Trevor Lawrence takes a jump. I expect them to. But again, that's a game you should win. And then after that, you go 5 straight games with 5 playoff teams from last year, being Minnesota, Denver, Detroit, Green Bay, and Pittsburgh. Obviously, Pittsburgh is not the same team that they were last year, but they always seem to be tough no matter what happens. So that stretch right there is brutal. But I think that home stretch from Pittsburgh, New York, and Chicago is where you really need to start hitting your stride. I think if you
Absolutely.
can get out of Lambeau, out of Green Bay, around that 500 mark, I think you feel like you're in a good spot because then you can kind of get hot right before the bye, and then you go into that bye week, and then we'll get to it at the tail end of the schedule. But there's a stretch there where it's going to get a little rocky, and then I think they can finish the season strong as well. So this schedule to me, it feels like, there's just a couple runs in the schedule that's going to be very difficult. And so it comes out in like 5 game blocks for this in this
Yep.
instance. Later in the season, it's a 3 game block where it's going to be a
Yep.
gauntlet. And so you have to get through those with ease, but at the same time, you have to take care of the other weeks because those obviously aren't easy.
Well, that was what killed the Bengals last year, was that they didn't take care of business when it was right in front of them to be taken care of. And well, that's why we're talking about them as a team that now hasn't made the playoffs in back-to-back seasons. As we look into this back half of the schedule, I mentioned how there are favorable and unfavorable runs in the schedule. I think the big thing about the back half of the schedule is you have a relatively favorable run, then the hardest 3 game stretch of the season, very easily, the hardest 3 game stretch of the season. And then you end the season with 3 games that I think the Bengals should win. And,
Yep.
and that's huge, right? Look at what happened last year when the Bengals got hot late in the season and almost had no right to, but almost forced their way into the NFL postseason. I think it sets up again where we know Joe Burrow and this Bengals team typically likes to play their best football late in the season. It's going to set up for them to be in position so long as they can take care of what's in front of them early in the season. Let's get into the back half of the schedule. They've got that bye in week number 10. In week 11, they travel to Pittsburgh. They'll take on the Steelers over in Pittsburgh. Then in the next week of the season, week 12, they'll host New England again. Obviously, last year that was the week 1 opener. Drake May, different new look, the team this year for the Patriots, but they didn't see Drake May last year. Drake May on the sideline, but the Bengals still lost that game. I think that game may have a sore taste in the mouth, especially after last year. Then you get to that 3 game stretch that I mentioned right here. This is week 13, week 14, week 15.
This defines your
At
season.
Baltimore. Yep. This is brutal. At Baltimore, Thanksgiving night. The Bengals can either make Thanksgiving awesome or ruin it. And they've done it before and they could potentially do it again. Big, big game, right? It's going to have that
Family
big
might be
game
mad at me
feel.
on
It's going to have
Thanksgiving.
that big game feel. It's in prime time. It is, again, this is a game where it has opportunity written all over it, right? If you can, you have to think that Baltimore's going to be pretty good again this year. And these two teams, and this is why the schedule is set up like this, because I think that the NFL anticipates that there's going to be some sort of divisional race between the Bengals and the Ravens. And the last couple years, the Bengals and Ravens have played early in the season. And yes, the Bengals have fallen off a little bit, and then Joe Burrow got hurt against Baltimore a couple years ago. But I think the league is anticipating another big time heavyweight clash like we've seen a lot of the last few years between Joe Burrow and Lamar Jackson. So that is the Thursday. Then they get a nice long week into another monster game. It's at Buffalo in the America's Game of the Week slot on Fox, which I thought was really interesting. That game was on
Yeah.
Fox. Huge game, right? A game that could well potentially play into AFC seeding. It's Joe Burrow versus Josh Allen for the first time since the 2023 postseason. It's the first time the Bengals have been there since that playoff game where the Bengals won 27-10 in comfortable fashion in the divisional round. And again, it's just two of the heavyweights in the AFC clashing. And then right after that, no rest for the weary, right back to Paycor Stadium to take on Baltimore again. I mean, let's pause again real quick.
Yeah.
Talk about that stretch.
Sure. That's season defining.
Mhm.
It is what it is because
Great, great
that
point.
that stretch right there is going to basically define. Because again, if the Bengals are what we believe they are and what they believe they are, which is good enough to win the division and make a deep run in the postseason, you have to beat Baltimore. And I know people are frustrated, me included, that once again we're in a prime time on the road at Baltimore on a short.
Ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
It's crazy that this is now the third year in a row that this has happened. I don't know why
I
that
think
is
it's utterly insane. I,
right.
I, I really don't get it. I brought that up specifically on this podcast last week. I said there is zero reason that the Bengals should be playing in primetime in Baltimore again. And what does the league do?
And
Put
on
the
a short
Bengals
week,
in
they're playing on
primetime in
Thursday
Baltimore
again.
again.
Yeah,
It
they're
makes
playing
I
on.
like even from like an outside fan perspective, tell me how that makes sense. If you're a fan, like if you're a fan of Baltimore, obviously you love it. But like if you're a fan of the other 30 NFL teams, How does it make sense that a team plays a division rival, a team that they have tons of recent history with in both the postseason and the regular season, play on the road in prime time 4 straight years? 2022. Well, you could even say, well, it's 5 primetime games because technically that playoff game was primetime, but that was at Paycor Stadium. 2022 Sunday Night Football, they lose. 2023 Thursday Night Football, Burrow has his wrist injury, they lose. 2024 Thursday Night Football, they lose. 2025 technically
But
Thursday night, but it's
yeah,
Thanksgiving.
it's a short week again. It's a short week again.
And it's 3 straight years on a short week. I
Yep.
think it's just if
Yeah. It's
I don't know the
frustrating, but
last
it is what it is. And at the end of the
it
day,
is.
like I was saying, like if the Bengals are who they say they are, they have to beat
Yeah,
Baltimore. Lamar Jackson's
exactly.
career record against the Bengals is 10-2. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like
Problem.
you have to find a way to get it done. Maybe the only solace you can take in this 3 game stretch is that, you see Baltimore in 2 to 3 weeks, 2 out of 3 weeks. The game plan doesn't change too much. And Josh Allen, I know Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen are different beasts. Josh is a lot bigger, but you play this running style quarterback who's a crazy athlete who can do both, and you play him 3 straight weeks. So maybe, linebackers and the game plan, it doesn't have to revolve that much. You're seeing a similar DNA, I guess, in a sense, for a quarterback. Maybe that's the only solace that you can take in this stretch, but it's a gauntlet. And in my opinion, you have to find a way to take 2 out of 3.
Hmm.
If you take 2 out of 3, you're feeling really, really, really good going into those last 3 games. But
I
it's
think the biggest thing about this stretch and why I actually am more optimistic about it, if this was a stretch from weeks, let's say 3 to 5, I'd be really worried, right? Because the Bengals, it's been an issue, right? It takes weeks for this team to identify itself. And yeah, clearly it's been an emphasis already this offseason. We're going to talk about this with Trey Hendrickson in a second, how the emphasis this offseason has already been on being better early, which I appreciate. And I'm sure a lot of Bengals fans feel the same way. But this stretch is Thanksgiving and then the first 2 weekends of December. And that is typically when the Bengals have been playing their best football the last couple of years. This stretch of 3 games is going to define their season, right? If they can find a way, if somehow they win all three, or if they win 2 of 3, we're talking about this team like Super Bowl contender, right? We're talking about this team that, look, they probably, let's say in this scenario, they go to Buffalo and win and they split with Baltimore. We're talking about this team as a Super Bowl contender that can go on the road and compete with the best teams in the AFC and is probably close, if not in the division lead right now at this point in the season, if that's how it goes, right? If they lose, if they get one, I mean, okay, I guess
yeah.
you can take it to an extent. If they lose all three, it'll just be, the narratives will be the same and they'll be deserved, right? And
If you take
and
one, it's got to be one of those Baltimore games.
it has
You
to
have
be.
to split with Baltimore. That's for me. That's going to be the biggest thing. Is just I know we talk about it a lot, but just the Bengals record in the division, like they have to find a way to get back and
See, it
win
was
that division.
better. It was a little bit better last year, but that was because they beat up on a bad Browns team
Right. They
twice. And
got
then,
kind of lucky with that, to be honest with you.
well, yeah, they
They played
really shouldn't have
sloppy in
lost.
Cleveland.
There's a reality where the Bengals went 6-0 in the division last year, right? If the defense could have, unscrewed itself a little bit and a couple things go their way in that first Baltimore game, again, that's kind of the story of last season, right? It's what if this, what if that. So, I think when you look at that stretch again, it's going to be season defining. And, I expect the Bengals to be in contention when this happens, right? When they get to this point in the season and they have to be playing their best football at that spot. And let's say they do play their best football. Well, it sets them up to finish the season on a really strong note because their last 3 games, in my opinion, are all extremely winnable. It starts after that Baltimore game. This is week 16 on the road in Miami on Sunday Night Football. I'll say 2 things about this game. Number one, I do not think this game sticks in the Sunday Night Football spot. And it's more because of Miami than Cincinnati. I just don't think Miami's going to be quite as good as maybe the league expects them to be this year. And I anticipate this game getting moved off of primetime for some other game in that schedule that means more for divisional and or whatever, right? So I feel like a game gets moved in there is the long story short. Then I also think that this is a game where, again, week 16, this is late December. If you're traveling, they're going to go to Buffalo and Baltimore in the weeks before this. It's going to be cold. You're going on to Miami, it's going to be a balmy, 55, 60 degrees. Those
It's
guys
gonna
will
be
be out there in
nice.
shorts and t-shirt, right? That's it'll be a vacation down in Miami essentially in the winter. I'm glad this game, I would much rather this Miami game be later in the season rather than
Oh,
having to go
absolutely.
in weeks 1 through 4 where it's going to be sweltering, 85 plus degree temperatures, humidity high. Just not fun to play in those temperatures,
And
especially
and
early in the season.
the last couple of years, Miami has started so fast. They've
Yes,
kind of
that's
been
another
the
great
opposite
point.
of the Bengals. Like they've started so fast and they've kind of teetered off near the end of the season. So you feel like if you're the Bengals, if that trend continues, you feel good about catching Miami late in the year versus early. So
Yeah, and then their last two games, these neither of these games are set schedule wise or even date wise.
that might
But
aggravate.
but the big thing about them is they're both at Paycor Stadium, and that is massive. They'll go back home for their last two games of the season. They will host Arizona in week 17, and then they will host Cleveland in week 18. And I think Arizona is a better team than Cleveland. Arizona is a team that's probably going to compete, I think can compete in the NFC West. We'll see how long they can compete in the NFC West. We'll see what their season looks like in week 17. Who knows if they're fighting for playoff positioning, wild card spots, or if they're not in it at all. Honestly, I don't really know what to think about the Cardinals this year. They're kind of a coin flip team for me. And then I do not expect Cleveland to be playing for much of anything besides draft position in week 18. So that is a favorable final two games, really final three games for the Bengals, in my opinion. And the big a couple of other points about the schedule. Number one, the Bengals travel the least amount of any team by air miles this year. I believe it's actually under 10,000 miles. They have no West Coast trips this year, which is big. Their farthest trip west is Denver in week 4. You have a lot of favorable kind of tweaks on the schedule in terms of not only the scheduling, but the way that a lot of these have been grouped together. I think the Bengals actually got a pretty good schedule in terms of the way things worked out. Aiden, the last couple of things we'll hit on with this schedule. Number one, give me, and this is way too early to be doing this, but whatever, we have fun here. Give me a record,
Okay.
toss it out there in, second to last week in May, and give me two games that are the two most important games on the schedule.
Yeah, let's do it. I've been teetering on this, I think, two records for a while, and I think this Trey stuff will push me in one direction. So I think I'm seeing like 10-7. 10-7 to 11-6 is kind of where I'm going. I'm going
Yep, it's
back and forth
exactly where I'm at. It's exactly where I'm at.
right between those two. And I think this, unfortunately, if this Trey stuff lingers and it kind of feels like it will linger, kind of pushes me a little bit towards that 10-7 side. I have no doubts about this offense, but the defense just scares me, especially after last year. Like they just have to prove that they can do it before I really believe in them again. But the two biggest games on the schedule for me, I mean, it's not going to be very surprising, but it's just the two Baltimore games. Like again, just Lamar Jackson being 10-2 against the Bengals in his career. You claim to be, one of the best teams in the AFC. I need you to go out and win your division and prove it. So those are the two biggest games for me.
Yeah, I really might have been my answer if I picked first, right? That was, I'll switch it up just to keep things easy, so that we get a little bit of a diversity of opinion. But for record, I'm going to lean towards 11-6. I think this team, the offense this year, is absolutely good enough to win this team probably 9 or 10 games on its
Yeah.
own. You look at the way Joe Burrow played last year. You look at the way Jamar Chase played last year. You're going to have T. Higgins now, who's got his money, no off-field distractions to concern him. You've got an offense that's just really deep. Mike Gesicki is back. He's been paid. I'm just saying, this is a conversation for later in the offseason. I've heard a lot of very good things about Jermaine Burton over the last couple of days and weeks in the offseason program. He's allegedly been very involved. He's in the facility every day. He's working. If the Bengals can unlock Jermaine Burton, that adds a whole nother layer to this offense that we
He was
haven't
at
even
Kings Island
discussed
with
yet.
all of them boys. He was at Kings Island
Yeah,
with
he was. He was
Jamar
in your
and
hometown.
Taylor Britt. Yeah, I missed him. He went back to Mason where I'm from, and I missed all those guys. I'm mad about it, but it's okay.
But again, if you can unlock Jermaine Burton, that adds a whole other layer. Haven't even got to the running back room yet, where you've got Chase Brown, you've got Samaje Perine back, you've got Zach Moss back, you've got Taj Brooks, your new rookie. You've got an offensive line that even with the questions at guard, I still think could be really, really solid, especially at the tackle positions where you have your future set in, Marius Mims for the next 4 years, and then, Orlando Brown Jr. for the next 2 years, at minimum, I think. I think you should have both of those guys for a lot longer than that. Then you look on the defensive side. The big thing for me, number one, you have a new defensive coordinator in Al Golden who is going to change the way this defense plays. Last year, the reason that this team won 5+ games in a row late in the season was because Lou Anarumo simplified the defense. They went very bare bones. They didn't, Lou Anarumo's defense, by the way, for those of you out there who don't know, extremely complicated. It's a very high level defense that requires a lot of film preparation, a lot of thought, a lot of extra effort, right? And that it's worked, right? Look at what the Bengals have done to Mahomes in the past when the personnel has been there for Lou Anarumo. Look what they've done to Josh Allen in the past in the postseason. But last year, the personnel wasn't there, and the Bengals struggled mightily defensively. Now, I think the personnel is better this year. I don't think it's crazily better. And if something were to happen with Trey Hendrickson, that could be a different question. But I think having Al Golden and his scheme in there, your linebacker heavy front, I think Demetrius Knight Jr. is going to be the key for this Bengals defense. I think he's going to come in and instantly be that off-ball linebacker right next to Logan Wilson. I think Jermaine Pratt will not be a Bengal probably past 2 or 3 weeks from now. I'm not really sure why he's a Bengal now. I think you look at the secondary, they're expecting guys to step up. I do think a guy like Dax Hill is going to step up big time. I think this is the year we see the Dax Hill we've been waiting to see a little bit. I'm a big Dax Hill believer this year. I think Cam Taylor-Britt, I'm not going to say he goes back to like his rookie year or his second year, but he's not as bad as he was last year, I don't think. And DJ Turner, I think, is another guy that flashed a ton. And I think, if he can stay healthy, the secondary is going to be better. I mean, it doesn't have, and this is the big thing with this defense. And I've said this a couple times already on the show. This defense does not have to be the 85 Bears. It does not have to be even last year's Philadelphia defense. It doesn't have to be a top 5 defense. It just needs to be a top 20 defense, right? They just need to be able to get a couple of stops, generate some turnovers, and give Joe Burrow and that offense enough room to work. Don't give up 35 points. They give up 20 points.
Joe Burrow and those guys don't need a lot of room. That's the thing.
No,
They
we've
can
seen
go
it.
out there.
Saw it all last year.
Saw it
This
last
offense
year.
was
We just
offense
need
was Hall of
a
Fame.
stop. And last year they could get a
All it
stop.
was. I mean, you think back to the Baltimore games. Really, all they needed was one stop, and they couldn't get it. So I'm gonna go 11-6. I think I'll do 2 different games since you did the Baltimore games. It's gonna be crazy. This one, it's week number 1. You have to set the tone in week number 1. How many years in a row? I mean, the Bengals, I believe, in the Joe Burrow era, I think they have 1 win in weeks 1 and 2 with Joe Burrow at quarterback. It is week 1 in 2021 against the Minnesota Vikings. They are 0-2 in 2020, 0-2 in 2022, 0-2 in 2023, 0-2 in 2024. That's inexcusable, first off. Second off, this is, again, kind of like last year, this is the year to change that, right? You have a Cleveland team that just really isn't very good, right? And I know that we have a couple Browns fans that tune in and friends of ours and watch this podcast, and I apologize to them who are watching this. This team is not very good, right? Who knows who's going to start at quarterback for them. If it's Joe Flacco, the Bengals should be able to feast on a guy that can't move in the pocket like they have in the past.
We'll get into that.
We'll get into that. We'll see. But I think they have to win that game, right? It's an inexcusable game to lose. The Bengals have beat the Browns the last 3 times in a row. They swept them last year. They beat them in 2023, which that one doesn't really count. But whatever, we'll count it for our purposes. That game is big. I think that game is you have to set the tone early. And then I think the second most important game for me is probably that Pittsburgh game on Thursday night. You're coming off back-to-back. You're coming off of a lot of national window games. We're going to learn a lot about the Bengals before the Steelers game, right? They could well be, I kind of see them around the 4-2 mark at this point, maybe 3-3, depending on how some things go. That starts a stretch where they play Pittsburgh, New York, and Chicago. That should be 3 wins. All 3 of those games are at Paycor Stadium. They get a nice, basically almost the entire month of October, they're at home,
Yep.
right? Starting with the Detroit game. They have one road trip the entire month, and it's to Lambeau Field, which isn't very far. Um, and then you go right into your bye after that. The Bengals should be able to start that game fast against Pittsburgh, even on a short week. You got to get on that team, right? And if you can win that game, you set yourself up to win two more games going to the bye with all sorts of momentum. So I'll go with that game as well.
Yeah.
So that'll do it, I guess, for our schedule talk. We're going to look more at the schedule over the course of the offseason. When we get into the weeds of July and June, there's going to not be as much to talk about. So we'll have to see how it goes from there. But now we got another big topic to talk about. I was actually driving to Cincinnati on Tuesday when I heard about this. The Bengals are in their offseason program. They're actually practicing probably right now as we speak on a beautiful day. And at least I'm in Southeast Ohio. It's still a beautiful day over here. I'm sure that weather's mostly translating over to Cincinnati. And well, it's a normal day. Trey Hendrickson had just put that request into Adam Schefter on Monday, and you're thinking, well, there's no way he shows up to offseason workout, which is voluntary, right? Wrong. He shows up looking like me right now, ready for a golf outing, right? Looked like he was about to go on the
Business
course and
casual.
shoot five on 18 holes. And he shows up in obviously not, football clothes, and you're thinking maybe he's just there to support the guys. And I mean, on one hand, yeah, he probably was. On the other hand, he had plenty to say. He had plenty to say. And there is a 25-minute interview that he does with the beat reporters in Cincinnati that I encourage very strongly for all of you to go listen to on your own. Me and Aiden have both listened to it by now. It is very much worth your time. Trey Hendrickson, very open, very, what's the word? Forthcoming, I guess is a good way to
Yep.
put it. Very honest about what he's seeing from his perspective. And I'll give you just a couple of quick notes before I know Aiden has plenty of thoughts and I want to let him do his piece. Number one, he did say that Zach Taylor texted him that if he did not show up to mandatory camp, which does not start until the end of next month, he would instantly be fined. Right? He would instantly be fined. He sent that text a month in advance. So Trey Hendrickson, he kind of took that as well. We're not going to work on anything. So that was a big note. They said that Trey Hendrickson said that there has been no communication, which I'm going to get to that. I don't necessarily believe that. But the Bengals, at least Trey Hendrickson is saying there has been a lack of communication since the draft, which has really been kind of a thing. We go back to the Pat McAfee show appearance that he did a few weeks ago, and then all the way back to his Schefter comments, right? It's been a constant theme throughout these negotiations. And when asked if he would play on this current deal, which he is not a free agent, he is under contract for the Bengals throughout the remainder of this year. He's set to earn $16 million this year. He was very non-committal. He was very, he didn't necessarily say,
It was a
no, I'm
firm.
not going to play on this contract.
It was a
But
firm no.
yeah,
He
no,
said,
I mentioned.
No, you're good. You're good. Paul Danner Jr. asked, would you be willing to play on your current deal? And it was a one-word answer. It was no.
So there are two things that I'm going to put into the sphere before Aiden goes on his thing, because I know Aiden has plenty of things to say. Number one, how do I even put this? Trey Hendrickson's agent is just not smart. Like I don't know his name. I don't have it in front of me. I just don't think his agent has gone about this process in the right way at all. You signed a free agent contract. Well, it was a free agent contract. You started a contract extension in 2023 that is why we're here. It's why we're in this spot. If you didn't like the money then, which like he wasn't signing on to make like top of the line edge money in 2023, why sign the contract? That's what I don't understand personally, right? And I'm not, again, I have plenty of gripes with the Bengals front office. They're not blameless in this by any stretch. But I do give the Bengals front office the teeniest, tiniest little bit of leeway here. Very small. It ain't much, but a tiny, tiny little bit of leeway. Now, we are running out of time to try and keep this podcast to our 30, 35 minutes. So, Aiden, I'm going to give you the floor, and I know you have plenty of thoughts. Please go
Yeah.
ahead.
So the first things first for me is my question is why is Zach Taylor texting Trey this
Yep.
information?
It's a great
Why is
point.
that not coming out of from the front office? Why like Zach's not handling the contract negotiations. Why does he have to be the one to reach out to Trey and tell him that? That just puts Zach in a horrible spot. Now, maybe Zach wanted to be that messenger, and maybe he wanted to fall on that sword. I'm not sure, but my biggest question from the Bengals standpoint, which is small, it's a small gripe, but it's like, why does Zach have to be the one to reach out to do that? Like, why is he the form of communication? Another thing I'll say is Trey coming to speak to the media. For me, he just doesn't have any leverage at this point, and this is him trying to pull some leverage back into his favor. If you're the Bengals, he's under contract for 16 million, an extremely team-friendly deal, assuming that he goes out there and plays and he's not willing to sacrifice any money. So the Bengals can just sit on their hands. Another thing to point out that James Rapine pointed out on his podcast is, guess what the projected 2026 franchise tag for a defensive end is, Ethan? It
I'm gonna
is
guess 16 million.
no,
No, it's gonna be
it's more
higher.
than that. It's more than that.
It's gonna be 26 maybe.
Yep,
20.
26 and a half.
Nice.
So you were spot on. 26.5 million to franchise tag. You think about how much guys like Myles Garrett, Hunter, and those and Max Crosby are getting paid. That is team friendly once again. So the
Hmm.
Bengals go to Trey and say, you're under contract for another year. And if you don't like this deal that we're trying to give you, which reportedly, according to Mike Florio, is about $28 million. And, the terms of that deal, how many years, et cetera, because Trey
That's
said,
the issue, I think.
whatever. But if you don't like this 28 million, we can franchise tag you. It feels very similar to the T situation from 2 years ago where T decided to go out and play on that franchise or play under that contract year, and then they franchise tagged him, and it got ugly.
I
So
have
it
the
feels
thing.
similar, but I mean, it's just that Trey doesn't have any leverage, and it feels
Yeah.
like he's trying to get some of that leverage back through that conversation.
And the thing about this is, I know a lot of people have been comparing this to T's situation. I think this is very different. I think the Bengals really messed up T's situation. Like, I don't think the Bengals did a very good job. They should have got ahead of that. And now, I mean, look, I'm very happy that T Higgins is a Bengal, and I think the Bengals eventually made the right move. But they probably costed themselves quite a few $1 million by waiting as long as they did to get T Higgins under a long-term contract, as they did for Jamar Chase, right? They kind of threw millions to the waste there. And that's a conversation for another podcast episode. But when you look at this situation, and I go back to the agent, and I go back to some of the decisions that Trey Hendrickson, not alone, I'm not blaming Trey necessarily. I'm more blaming his representation for this. When you sign that contract extension in 2023, he was on a 4-year, $60 million contract initially, right? That was the free agent deal that he signed with Cincinnati back in 2021 offseason. That was 15 million a year. You did get a slight raise up to 16 million for this contract, which was it was like a kind of a pseudo one. It was a weird extension.
Yeah.
Um, you go into this, and now, yes, I understand you do deserve more money. I wholeheartedly agree with that. Trey Hendrickson deserves to be paid like a top of the line D. I don't think you'll find a Bengals fan out there that disagrees with that. But the Bengals don't have to fold, like Aiden said, they don't have to fold to demands here because they're not out of contract. Now, could the Bengals do this? Yeah, absolutely. I think that they could potentially extend. I see like a 3-year, maybe like an $85 million contract potentially happening. I could see that. But I think the main issues right now are number one, the years. I don't think the Bengals, again, we've talked about this specific issue before. The Bengals do not like going over 30. And to be fair with the Bengals on this, they were proven right with Geno Atkins and Carlos Dunlap. They were proven right. They paid both of them a lot of money going into their age 30 seasons, and both of them had major fall offs, right? The Bengals don't want a repeat of that, and they're in no rush, right?
Yeah.
They have, like Aiden said, they have all the leverage here.
Yeah, and for me, this is my biggest frustration with the Bengals front office, and I will say this till I'm blue in the face. So if they're reportedly willing, if Mike Florio's report is correct, and they're willing to offer Trey $28 million, and why has it taken this long for them to get that done? I think if they offer Trey 28 million for 2 years or 3-year extension before Myles Garrett and before Max Crosby, I think he signs it. Because at
I
that time,
agree.
before the Nick Bosa outlier, which the Nick Bosa outlier has completely changed the DN market because I believe he got like 35 million and then, Myles Garrett wanted more than that. But before that, $28 million was relatively reasonable for top end D line talent. So you go to him with that 28 million and I think he heavily considers it. But you sit and you wait and then Myles Garrett signs for 40, Max Crosby
Noticing a
signs
pattern,
he
noticing a
signs
pattern.
he signs for his deal, and now Trey's going to the table saying, "I deserve that," and you can't really say he's wrong. And so you're in a position where
But again, are we
you
noticing
just
a pattern
avoided
here?
this. And if you
They
don't
sat,
want to pay him, if
they
sorry,
sat and
last
waited.
thing I'll say on this, if you don't want to pay him, trade him. You trade him
Hmm.
before the draft.
Yep. Get some
This whole
capital.
limbo situation is a lose-lose for everyone involved.
They sat and waited on T. They sat and waited on Jamar. They even sat and waited on Joe. Right? Remember how long that took?
It was
And
like the
a
Thursday before
no-brainer
the season
contract.
started or something stupid.
Yep. They sat and waited, even go, you want to go way back. They sat and waited on AJ Green. They sat and waited on a number of their star players, right? They signed, waited, and lost on Jesse Bates, right? This is an ongoing theme, and that'll be the last thing I say about this, where they sit on their hands and they like, again, we've talked about Philly a lot, obviously not just because they're Super Bowl champions, because they're proactive. They sign their guys. You know another franchise that does this a lot? Baltimore. They sign their guys early in their contracts when they see they have something, and all of a sudden, wow, how is this guy on contract? How can they, like, everybody's like, how can the Eagles do this? How can they make these cap moves? Because they get in front of these deals. They get in front of
Right.
it, and that's why it
Right.
works.
Yeah, and again, like to my last point, like if you knew after this Myles Garrett deal and this Max Crosby deal, which happened before the draft, if you guys knew there was no way you were getting to that figure, you have to trade them. You have to
Agreed.
try to maximize that value. Now, I think that the two sides can still find some middle ground, and I believe if the Bengals can get to three, if they can get to 30 million average annual value, I think we could have a conversation, but it's going to come down to how many years. And if Trey wants going on 4 years, I just don't think the Bengals ever get there. And I don't think you can blame the Bengals for not wanting to get
Yeah.
there. So it will be interesting. But right now, the Bengals hold all the cards, and it's just who's going to blink first. And right now, it's looking like Trey's probably going to be the one to blink first because the Bengals don't have to blink.
Exactly. The Bengals can sit on their hands, right? And if, and it really, I think it might, at this point, it may come down to will Trey play or not. I hope he does,
Right.
right? Because he is a huge part of
They
this
make it
team,
ugly.
but it's going to be a major thing to see what happens. And, well, I guess we'll just start off the preview for next week by saying we'll just have an update, right? Whatever ends up happening over the next week, because it is dominating a lot of the headlines, whether he gets traded, whether he does anything happens with Trey, we'll talk about that. We'll also have plenty of other things to discuss. A lot of Bengals are in the building right now. We'll discuss some of the positional battles as well that are going to be going on throughout training camp and into preseason. So that'll wrap it up for this edition of the Jungle Fever podcast. For Aiden Crowley, I'm Ethan Sargent saying so long. We'll see you next Monday. Peace.